All right, 007 First Light. It's out this week, and I had a chance to play the game early as IO Interactive sent over a review code right at the end of last week, just ahead of Memorial Day weekend. And I've been pretty excited to check this game out because I was really curious to see how they would approach this title after spending so much time with the Hitman franchise. And I was kind of picturing it to be like that, just in the 007 universe. Turns out it's a bit different, and I'm actually pretty happy about that. So I wanted to go over some of my just overall thoughts as I have now completed the game, and I'll work to keep this spoiler free as possible. I still want to show you some gameplay from it, of course, but what I decided to do was go back to some of the earlier missions and levels and record footage there, so I don't like spoil anything that happens obviously later on in the game with story or even some certain set pieces that I think are pretty cool and you should experience yourself for the first time. But I'll talk about the game here today. So if you guys enjoy the video, hit the like button, subscribe if you're new. So if you are a fan of 007, I will save you the time. Go ahead and buy this game. I think you'll get a kick out of it. I think you'll enjoy it for the most part all the way through. And it's sort of like taking a bunch of Bond movies and like mashing them together. And I actually think the game starts off pretty strong. And at this time, IO Interactive already just posted the first mission completely. But you can just see that the beginning where Bond is in a helicopter and is shot down, and then he just kind of comes across an operation that does involve MI6, and from there it's off and running. I mean, it is kind of nonstop actually as you go, and a lot of the missions or chapters flow together pretty well here. But you will see, of course, right off the bat, a very green and very young James Bond who is trying to find his way to becoming the of course famous 007 secret agent. And this is a very, very witty and sarcastic Bond, as kind of how you'd expect, right? A very brash young Bond who thinks he's just kind of invincible, as he goes along. And so he has some very good one-liners that he'll throw out there, but they don't linger on them too long or anything. He'll just kind of say it almost in passing, but sure, also in response to different things that people are saying to him. But I actually think they're pretty well done. They'll get a chuckle out of you here and there, and it plays into the campiness out of the 007 franchise. And they lean into all kinds of things from the series where you have the over the top bad guy who, instead of just shooting Bond, has to come up with some contraption or what have you. And they touch on all those tropes, which again I think is a lot of fun, and it'd be disappointing if they didn't do that. However, despite the campiness, there's still some serious moments in there that I think actually are better because of the vast contrast between those. And the story has several twists and turns, and there were maybe two missions where I felt like it was dragging a bit. And when I'm starting to think, it's like you play a video game and you understand there are going to be some inconveniences that are thrown in there. So the video game lasts a bit longer. And then you kind of start to think, is this just padding? I started to get that feeling in two different chapters. But as I was starting to think that, 10 or 15 minutes later, they wrap things up. So it didn't necessarily go on to the point where it was like detrimental or anything to the experience. And because there are obvious breaks in the story with these twists and turns, as I mentioned, it's kind of like having a few Bond movies mashed together. You can sort of see where if they wanted to make this like a couple of movies, they could actually do it. But because of the runtime, which it took me, and it's going to depend on how you approach things. It took me about 15 hours to play through the first time here for the story. There's a lot to actually go through here with First Light. For the graphics and presentation, I was pretty happy with what I was seeing, because one of the big concerns going into this game with the frame rate that was displayed with one of the state of plays that happened, and they were showing a whole sequence with a plane and all kinds of like stuff blowing up at an airport, and it got kind of sketchy with that frame rate as that was happening. But I went through that exact same sequence in First Light with the final build that they pushed out, and the frame rate was solid. I mean, I'm playing on the PS5 Pro, so if you have a regular PS5, maybe look up some footage for that. But on the PS5 Pro, it just maintained a pretty solid 60-ish frames, probably like in the 50s to 60s that whole way. And I really didn't have anything that was so noticeable where I was like, "Whoa, what happened here? Everything's blowing up and it's in the teens or something for frame rate." No, not at all. It was pretty much smooth sailing the whole way through. And so they're cutting in and out of gameplay and cutscenes with the presentation, and they'll throw in quick time events as you're going through as well to at least kind of keep you somewhat engaged. But yeah, there will be like stretches of time where you are watching a lot of stuff happen, but again, it plays into the narrative driven aspect to this game because I was going into it thinking more Hitman than anything, and I come out the other side with maybe 30% Hitman, 70% Uncharted, like a third person action adventure game with platforming because there's more platforming I guess than maybe you'd expect here. Now you are James Bond, so you're of course a spy, you're sneaking around, there's a lot of stealth elements to it, but eventually you get to a point where they go, okay, you license to kill, go crazy if you want. And I think that's a very important thing to consider if you want. Because while I mentioned there's a lot of Uncharted here, and that does work into the gunplay where it's third person over the shoulder action with a reticule, and you have your standard pistol, assault rifles, shotguns. There's a sniper, but it's more just high powered rifle without a scope, kind of. But you have like some pretty standard guns to use. However, when you do get to a point where you get your gadgets, you can go about this in different ways to where you don't have to kill anyone. In fact, there are challenges that lean into the idea of you being a ghost or a pacifist through these different levels. And in order to do this with your Q watch, you can do things like activate, say, a vacuum cleaner that's in the room that will distract a guard and you can sneak past them, or you can take them down, knock them out, and continue along. And there are a lot of things in the environment that you can interact with, and some more than others depending on the setting. But because there are so many different routes and ways through what are kind of like the open zone areas, there are a lot of different solutions that people will experience that will differ from maybe another person's first time playthrough. So as you're going through what are fairly linear like linear paths in the game, you will come out to these larger areas where maybe you're in a party that's happening and you have to get to the top floor, but there's a security checkpoint. So you have to decide how you want to try to slip past them. Do you want to try to blend in with the security task force, maybe steal a disguise and then the access card and go through that way as a private detail for security? Or do you want to try to become part of the press? So you got to get a camera and a press badge, and then you can get by in that way, but you won't necessarily be able to get through the high level security door that you would if you were the security team. So then you have to sneak through the vents, and you kind of get the idea. There are winding paths, even though it is point A to point B, like you're trying to get to the end of the level, there are many different ways to go about it. So when that happens, it is like pure straight up Hitman, like puzzle solving. And it doesn't necessarily linger on that too long, but when it does it is a nice change of pace that I really think breaks up the more linear straight line run and gun or stealth action adventure that takes place with the Uncharted side. So as I mentioned, there are gadgets in the game with your Q watch, and there's a handful of gadgets. I did like there's a pen you get that's a rocket launcher. It's like, oh, that's fun. You shoot missiles all over the place with it. You're able to electrocute people or shoot them with a dart, make them sick. And that way you can get someone like guard off of their post or distract them to pickpocket them. The thing I think I would have liked to have seen with the gadgets is maybe a setup where you're researching them or you're leveling them up in some way. And unfortunately, the way that the story goes in the game, and it keeps Bond on the move, you don't necessarily have like a central home base hub. So maybe that's one of the reasons they weren't able to go that route. But for maybe the next one, because they've already talked about it becoming a series for them, maybe they explore the idea of, I guess, skill trees. I don't know how many people would be super into skill trees for each and every gadget. I would just like to see some progression attached to, like, I would assume all kinds of different ideas they can come up with for a lot of these spy gadgets that 007 would be able to use, because then he'd have obviously the moniker and he'd be a much more experienced spy, and maybe he has all kinds of different things that the Q watch can branch off to becoming. So I think that would be something that'd be really cool to see. You will also run into hand-to-hand combat, which is kind of broken down into standard strikes. You have grapples. You also can like parry, like kind of the Arkham system where you see them turn a certain color. There's an indication. And then for me, is press circle and you'll block it. And it worked well enough. It certainly wasn't super polished necessarily when there were a bunch of enemies in front of you. And at times there were some higher level enemies that felt extremely spongy, but it was pretty satisfying when you pull off a chain of parries and maybe a dodge, grapple them, and then throw them into things. As I mentioned, the environments very, very interactive. Not necessarily just they explode a lot. You can take a hand cart in front of you, kick it forward, and it'll just hit a bunch of enemies and knock them out. Or you grab them and start smashing their head against a server, and they'll get electrocuted. So it's there's a lot of stuff that you can do in the game that does make you feel quite powerful, even in hand-to-hand combat. Without, again, spoiling too much, you're James Bond. You're going to be hopping around to different locations all across the world. And while the 15-hour runtime and looking back on it, there were only like 2 spots that I thought lingered a bit too long. I do feel like they probably could have cut those down a bit, and maybe it would have been a 13 or 14-hour experience instead of the 15 or so hours that I had here. But I do think they can tighten this up even a bit more. With that said, though, my early time with the game, I did have some crashes that happened, and I've seen like 3 patches, I think, go out since I first booted up the game. So maybe they've been working through that. I was putting this game in like suspend mode and then rest mode on the PS5 Pro a fair amount because I wasn't 100% sure where all the checkpoints were, and I didn't want to go back maybe 15 minutes or something. So with that in mind, it's like an always online game. And there's like offline mode, and I'm not really sure, maybe leaderboards or something that it's trying to stay connected for. But I noticed that when I was in rest mode and then coming out of rest mode, maybe a few minutes into playing it from there, it would come back and say I've been disconnected and I have to retry to reconnect. And that might just be a thing of rest mode for the PS5 Pro in this game. And the crashes, what would happen, or like the game would be loading and it would just be stuck in like an infinite load. It just would not kick through it. I got the day 1 patch as I was finishing up the game. So there you go. It could happen with pre-release titles. That's just my experience. There was some crashing. Outside of the main story mode, there's also something called Tactical Simulator, I believe. And I had gone through the whole game, and as I was finishing up, come back out to the menu, I see this thing and I go, well, let me try this out before I start putting my thoughts together on it. And it's an entire almost VR mission style thing where you can go through and they have all kinds of scenarios that you'll try to navigate and hit certain challenges. You'll get points, and then you can from there buy all kinds of stuff to build out your arsenal or even your outfits. So the game with the challenges, as I'm going through the main story, seem to mostly lean into the idea of unlocking skins or different outfits for Bond, or just like the weapons, ways to change up the look of them. And I mean, that's fine. That's kind of how it was back in the day. You would mostly do unlocks for ways to make your character look different when you're playing through multiple times. So maybe you want Bond in a full tuxedo, or you want Bond in like a prison jumpsuit or something. Those are things you can unlock, as you go through the game. And the only thing is the gadgets get skins, but you don't really see the gadgets much. Like in the game, you might see them there initially when you're maybe seeing your watch and you're picking it out. But from there, it's pretty small, or it's like a blink and you'll miss it kind of animation for Bond using it. So I don't really know how great of a reward that necessarily is. I will say, though, after I was going through some of the first challenges and missions in the Tactical Simulator, I'd recommend taking a look at those sooner rather than later, because there were some parts that they kind of explain to you or go over that certainly would have been useful to understand or realize even in like the early parts of the main story. Also, it's kind of fun to go through and be able to complete the challenges and then take the points or the currency that you get and upgrade things or unlock stuff. And that's sort of a progression system I'd like to see applied to the main story for the next one. For the most part, looking back on it, I was pretty happy with everything I saw here for 007 First Light, and I think it's a good start for IO Interactive, as again, this seems like it's going to be a series for them going forward. And I'm really happy that they didn't mess up the Bond character, because obviously that's going to be the primary focus of a series that they're trying to build here going forward. I think they did a very good job bringing Bond into 2026 without maybe holding back on certain aspects to his character. Nope, he is certainly James Bond in 2026. But let me know what you guys think about this down below in the comments. I try to keep it relatively spoiler free, so do me a favor, try to do the same down below in the comments. And if you picked it up already, let me know your thoughts on it so far as you're working through it. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.